Boss tried to kiss single dad while drunk, and he said, "If you were sober, I'd make the first move." Before we begin the story, don't forget to subscribe and follow Tender Bonds. Like and share our story. She leaned in at 11:45 near the coach rack at the Elks Lodge and pressed her mouth against his jaw, not his mouth, not quite, but close enough that he felt the warmth of it, and stood completely still. Then she pulled back. The DJ was playing something from 2003 that nobody was dancing to. Her eyes were steady, champagne bright, and she said, "Okay," and he said, "Okay," and then, "If you were sober, I'd have made the first move." He paused. "I want that noted." Something moved across her face, not a smile, something before a smile. She said, "Noted," and reached for her coat, and he walked her outside into the 12-degree air and called her a cab, and they stood on the sidewalk talking about nothing with the specificity of people who are talking about everything. And when the cab's taillights went red at the corner, he stood in the cold a long time after. That was December 18th. This was January. He was on the front step at 6:40 in the morning with his thermos, and the cold was the Ohio kind, not crisp, not clean, but thick, a thing you walked through. The Renners' Christmas lights were still up across the street, and they hadn't been festive since Thanksgiving, and now they just blinked, the way a house does when it has forgotten the occasion but kept the habit. He'd stood on this same step on the 19th of December, and the 20th, and every morning since, and not once had he made the move he'd told her he would make. His phone said 12 degrees, the truck needed 5 minutes, he gave it 7. Joni was still asleep, 8 years old, and she slept the way her father had slept, on her side, one arm off the mattress, knuckles nearly grazing the floor, as if she'd been reaching for something in the dark and lost it. Miller had slept exactly like that. Their freshman year they'd shared a room for one semester, and Silas had come in at 2 in the morning more nights than he could count and found Miller's arm dangling, breathing slow and total, at peace with wherever he was. Silas had always been jealous of that. The sleep of someone who'd stopped arguing with his location. Miller died on a Tuesday in August, 15 months ago now. A thing with his heart no one had known about. 34 years old, a 4-mile run in the heat, and then not. His mother had called Silas before she called the chaplain. Silas had driven to Delphos that same afternoon and had been here, more or less, ever since. First in the spare room for the practical weeks after, then in the main bedroom when it became clear that Joni needed someone in the house, and that Silas was the person she'd stopped flinching away from. He'd promised Miller's mother he would keep Joni in the house, not an apartment, not somewhere decent, the house. The one in Delphos with the detached garage, and the gutters that needed attention, and the kitchen window that let in a draft come November. He'd told himself it was temporary every morning for the first 3 months. He'd stopped telling himself that sometime around the new year. And on the workbench in the garage, since the week he moved in, Miller's toolbox, red, dented along the lower left corner from a ladder fall that Miller had laughed about for days. Silas moved around it the way you move around furniture in the dark, by memory, by the specific shape of the absence it occupied. Every time he backed the truck out, he caught it in the side mirror, growing small as the garage door came down. The job at Renner Supply had come through Deb Calloway, a woman who had gone to high school with Silas's mother and still treated Silas with the proprietary authority of someone who remembers you at 12. Deb made a call. The call led to Cassandra Trace, Cass, the operations manager, who ran her interview from behind a desk buried in the organized clutter of someone who moved fast and resented stopping. She looked at his resume for about 4 seconds. Warehouse floor, 40 hours, sometimes 45, forklift cert or willing. Willing. You got a kid. He hadn't put that on the resume. She's 8. School lets out at 3, floor closes at 5. Neighbor watches her till I'm home. She looked at him then, not evaluating exactly. More like locating, the way you locate a sound before deciding whether to do anything about it. Deb vouched for you. I don't usually hire on Deb's word, but she was specific. What'd she say? Said you were steady. Cass turned the resume face down. Monday. Steady, he thought about that word the whole drive home, following the gray highway through the gray fields, the flat Ohio geography that feels like an argument against drama, against anything requiring altitude or climax. Everything out here was horizontal. You had to supply your own depth. He'd been called steady before. In high school it meant boring. In the Army it meant useful. Miller had used it once, drunk on a back porch in Toledo the summer Silas came home. You're the most stable thing in my life, and I genuinely can't decide if that's a compliment. Silas had laughed, the way he always laughed at Miller's honesty, because laughing was easier than sitting inside it. He'd understood the word differently now. A nail was steady, a nail held, a nail did not move toward anything. The first weeks at Renner he kept to the east aisle and learned the floor the way he'd learned other things, quietly, completely, without announcing it. Cass had a way of standing in her office doorway with a mug, watching the floor below her, not checking on anyone, just watching the way you watch weather. The first time Silas looked up and caught her doing it, she didn't look away. Neither did he, for a beat that lasted longer than it should have. And then she went back inside and he went back to the pallet he was pulling, and that was that. Except it wasn't that quite. In October she came down to the east aisle to walk the inventory with him, standard. She did it with everyone. And at one point he was reading off numbers and she was entering them, and he asked about a code that didn't match, and she leaned over to look at his clipboard and stayed leaning a half second after she'd found the answer, her shoulder near his, and said, "Keystroke error, I'll fix it," and straightened, and neither of them mentioned the half second. He'd thought about it on the drive home. He'd thought about it more than he should have. In November, she texted him at 8:30 on a Friday about a shipping manifest discrepancy. Nothing that needed immediate attention. Nothing that couldn't have waited until Monday. He'd answered in 4 minutes. She'd sent a thumbs up. He'd stared at that thumbs up for a while before putting his phone on the counter and going to check on Joni. He had not done anything with any of this. That was, he was beginning to understand, a defining characteristic of his life, the careful, practiced art of not doing anything with things. The Christmas party was at the Elks Lodge, and then it was over, and December became January, and Silas ran the east aisle and Cass ran the floor, and they were professional with a precision that required effort, which was itself a kind of information. She appeared in the break room twice, and both times there was a beat of silence between them that both of them filled, quickly, with something about work. He noted that she also filled those silences. He noted that this meant she was also, in some way, managing something. He noted all of this and did nothing with it. The cold kept. The Renner's lights blinked. Miller's toolbox sat on the workbench. It was a Wednesday in the third week of January. A thaw had come through. The temperature lifted to 38, and it rained instead of snowing, which was worse in a different way. The streets gone dark and the gutters running fast. The world briefly looking as if it were trying to melt back into something it had been before. Joni had gone to bed with a low fever, not alarming, just enough to make her quiet at dinner, pushing her food around. He'd sat on the edge of her bed until she was under, his hand on her forehead, and then gone to the kitchen and couldn't sleep. So he was at the sink drinking water and listening to the rain when the sound came from below the house. A high, persistent hiss, not wind. He stood still for 3 seconds, then opened the basement door. The pipe under the utility sink had split, not dramatically, not a burst so much as a steady bleed, a pressurized spray about the width of a thumb already putting an inch of water in the low corner by the furnace. The hiss was louder down here. He found the main shutoff behind the water heater and killed it, and when the hiss stopped the silence felt like holding breath. He had Miller's toolbox. He had no idea what he was looking at. He stood in his socks in the cold water with his phone flashlight on a clean split in the copper, and understood that he had hit, for the first time in 15 months, the hard edge of what he could sustain alone. He opened his phone. His most recent text was from Cass, sent at 7 that evening. Manifest from Tuesday, still off by 3 units, can check in the morning, not urgent. He had answered, I'll pull the log first thing. She had sent a thumbs up. He had stared at the thumbs up. He called her, 2:17 in the morning, it rang twice. Sila's. Alert, immediate, no performance of having been asleep. I have a burst pipe. A pause, I'm sorry, I should have called a plumber. Is the main off? Yes. Is Joni okay? He had not expected that question first. He said, she's got a low fever, she's asleep. Give me 20 minutes. She arrived in 19, in a truck he hadn't known she owned, with a canvas bag of tools and a comm that was different from her work comm, not managerial, not positioned. She was wearing a canvas jacket over what looked like pajamas, hair back, rubber boots on, and the boots told him everything. She'd thought about what she was coming to before she left the house. She looked at the pipe and said, this is a plumber call, but I can wrap it tonight and it'll hold till morning. You don't have to. Sila's. The way she said it stopped the sentence. She went to one knee in the standing water and worked, and he crouched beside her and held things when she needed a hand somewhere, and they didn't talk, and the basement was cold and smelled of concrete and standing water, and at some point he looked at her profile in the phone flashlight glow and thought, this is the version of a thing that is too specific to invent. Upstairs, Joni cried out once fever dream, not alarm, and Cass said go before Sila's had fully stood. He got Joni water, sat on the edge of the bed until she went back under, came back to the top of the stairs. Cass was already climbing them, wiping her hands on a rag. That'll hold. Call Ernie Briggs in the morning, tell him I sent you. Okay. She was 3 steps below him, which made them nearly level, and she was packing her bag with the efficiency of someone who knows where everything lives. He watched her hands. You didn't have. Sila's. I know. He said it twice. I know. And then, because the sentence had been waiting since December and he was tired of the careful art of not doing anything with things, I said I'd make the first move when you were sober. She stopped packing the bag. You're sober, he said. She looked up at him. The kitchen light was behind him, and he stepped down one stair so the light found both of them. Outside the rain was finishing, just the sound of it leaving. She said, I have been sober for 34 days. I know. A long beat, not uncomfortable. The kind of beat where 2 people are deciding whether to stop managing something. How's the fever? She said. It'll break by morning. She looked at him. He stepped down the last stair so they were level and the light was equal between them, and he put his hand against her jaw, just his palm, just resting there. Not pulling, not pressing, simply placed. The way you place something you've been carrying a long time and finally found the right surface for, and she closed her eyes for exactly 1 second and then opened them. He took his hand back. She picked up her bag. You could stay, he said. The couch, in case the wrap. Sila's. But the way she said it this time was different. This time it meant yes. She set the bag back down by the door. She was asleep on the couch when Joni found her at 6:45, standing in the hall doorway in her pajamas, fever gone, studying this woman in her house with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read new things slowly. Silas was at the stove. He heard Joni say, very quietly, "Your name is Cass." "That's right. My dad's boss." "Yes." The pipe broke, not a question. "It did." A silence. Then, "Do you want pancakes? He makes them when something goes wrong." Cass made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was made from the same material. "Yeah," she said. "I want pancakes." He made them the way Miller had shown him, too much butter, which was wrong by every standard but gave the edges a brown crisp that nothing else produced. Joni ate and narrated her fever like a small survivor. Cass drank her coffee and asked questions without performing interest in the answers. Outside the kitchen window, the January thaw was still loosening things drip from the eaves, the street dark and wet. The Ohio sky shifted to something lighter that wasn't hope exactly, but was adjacent to it. After Cass rinsed and Silas dried, and they stood at the sink quiet in the way of something being held carefully because of its weight. "I've been here 15 months, he said, to the window, not to her. "I know." I told myself it was for her. He didn't need to say who. When I came, I had a hole, I had reasons. He looked at the water moving in the gutter outside. "But I don't think I've been surviving for her. I think she's been." He stopped. The sentence was too large for the kitchen, maybe for language. Cass had gone still beside him. She didn't fill it. The dish towel was in his hands and she reached over and took one end of it, not pulling, just holding it between them the way you hold something that belongs to both people. "Yeah," she said, "I know." Ernie Briggs came at 8:30. Cass left before he arrived. She had a floor to open. On her way to the truck, she stopped in the garage doorway and looked at the workbench, at the red toolbox dented in its lower left corner. "That his?" "Miller's." She looked at it a moment, put it on the high shelf, where you can see it but it's not in the way. Then she left. He did it that evening, after Joni was in bed. He lifted the toolbox onto the high shelf above the pegboard, and the single bulb caught the dent and the edge of the cardinal decal Miller had stuck on years ago, Ohio's bird, the red mostly gone now, just the ghost of a shape. He stood below it for a while. Then he turned off the light and went inside. A week later she came for dinner. She brought wine she didn't open, and Joni showed her a drawing of a horse that was technically a dog, and Cass considered it with full seriousness, and said the proportions were confident, which made Joni laugh from her whole body. After dinner Silas washed and Cass dried and Joni went to bed, and they sat at the kitchen table with iced tea and talked until 11. A warehouse problem, a book she'd been reading, the gutters, which could not wait until March. Around 10 the conversation ran out and they sat in the quiet of it, and he looked at her and she looked at him, and nothing was said for long enough that it became its own sentence. At 11 she stood and put her jacket on and he walked her to the porch. She stopped at the top of the steps and looked at the street. The Renner's lights were finally down. The street was bare and cold and dark, the thaw well over. January settled back into its position. Her truck sat at the curb. She stood on the porch and did not go toward it. He stood in the doorway and did not close the door. He thought about saying something, something that would count, something that would prove he was done with the careful art of not doing anything with things. He opened his mouth and then he understood that the proof was already in the air between them. Had been since she'd set the bag back down 3 nights ago, and that the only move left was the one they were already in the middle of. Standing here, the porch light on, the cold holding them both, neither one of them leaving. Above them the porch light burned yellow in the dark, not announcing anything, just on because someone had left it on in case it was needed, and it was needed, and that was enough.